Um, we are launching the webinar, but it takes a few minutes for people to join. So if we can start in 1 minute, that will be perfect. Thank you. Soli Bey, I think we can start now, and then people continue to join. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Berlin Bosphorus Initiative's panel on the future of transatlantic relations and the future of Turkey's relations with Germany, Europe, and the rest of the alliance. Lately, especially in the United States, Turkey has been called an ally, but not a partner. I tend to think this is another American exaggeration, but maybe there are those who share the same view in Europe as well. We are having this meeting the day when President Biden is finishing his long European tour that started in the UK, continued again in the UK with the G7 summit, then on Monday, the NATO summit, and yesterday, the EU-US summit, and today with President Putin, two leaders who called themselves, one Biden called Putin a murderer, and the other one called Biden a senile man. I'm sure that will be a very nice and easy conversation between the two of them. Michael Thuman, you have the opening of the panel. Your co-panelist was so scared of your presence that he decided that he should take his PhD exam instead. And so you have the floor and you will set up the framework for us. How do you evaluate President Biden's long European tour? What has been accomplished? What appears on the surface with all the smiles and hugging and kissing and all that, does it reflect the current state of affairs in the transatlantic alliance, which has been shaken particularly under President Trump? From Munich Security Conference's Westlessness, are we coming back, even if gradually, to another period of a West standing together and facing the challenge of a rising China? And on the side, we'll have to deal with a rather disturbing Russia. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Soli.
6 to 7 minutes, you can take 10.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yes, I think my co-panelist, Ludwig, he was stuck in the train in southern Germany. I was also on the train. Ah, okay. All right. But I was also on the train and my train was in time, so I'm glad to be here with you and not to broadcast this from inside the train, which is a shaky connection. Well, what you've just mentioned, the series of summits we have seen now over the past days, I think, but let me start with the observation that I believe they have vastly improved the atmosphere between the governments of the Western Alliance, and they also have diffused some of the thorny issues, such as the airline sanctions between Boeing and Airbus. Other sanctions like steel could not be resolved. But what I think the most important factor which could not be resolved entirely, but a compromise has been reached, this is the very diverse approaches vis-a-vis China and authoritarian states in general. And this surfaced particularly when President Biden and Chancellor Merkel met. Joe Biden tried to rally the alliance around the flag of democracy, forge an alliance of democracies against authoritarian states, while the German chancellor to go down this dichotomy in international relations, and she emphasized multilateralism, be it value-based or not, but multilateralism and cooperation, which has, I believe, entirely different connotations. Because if you hoist the flag of multilateralism instead of democracy, it means first to allow the EU to pursue a slightly different trade policy with China and also with Russia, independently of the US. Second, I think it's a clear acknowledgement of the fact that NATO and the EU are by no means alliances of flawless democracies. Because it's the US itself, as we have seen, which turned under Donald Trump into a democracy, let me say, a democracy of concern. And even today, as we witness the deplorable development of the grand old party, we see that there are dangers further down the road, and I think we will see that already in the midterm elections in 2022, when there is the chance that Biden loses his slight majority in Congress now. But there are inside the EU, there are clear examples, and inside the alliance, it's the governments of Poland and Hungary, which are on the verge of destroying the rule of law in their countries. It is also Turkey, which is no more a democracy in the classic sense, but rather an authoritarian state with limited democratic procedures and regular elections, of course. And I think if I turn back to Merkel and Biden, both of them, they have to work with with all these states in the vast alliance on a regular basis. And it's particularly Merkel who knows that today's NATO maybe rather looks like NATO in the Cold War with Portugal's Salazar and Greek putschists rather than the consolidated democratic NATO in the brief period of the 1990s. So, and this, of course, influences also Merkel's view on Turkey. And I think her perspective can be very well described against the backdrop of the French perspective on Turkey in three areas, which is strategic outlook, which is economic interest, and which is the domestic impact of these relations. We remember that when at the beginning of this year, last year already, the Turkish-Greek crisis started, the crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean, that Germany and France came up with very different solutions to that problem. While Macron sent fighter jets and a frigate to the Mediterranean theater, Angela Merkel sent her foreign minister. And in talks behind closed doors, officials from Berlin and Paris actually clashed over their differing approaches. From the outside, it might have looked like, division of labor, bad cop, good cop tactics. But in fact, there were, even if this was sometimes the result of it, there were frictions behind the scenes. And Merkel, I believe, sees Turkey rather as in a bigger strategic context. She thinks that Ankara should be actively engaged to prevent it from sliding into too close relations with Russia or with China in general, her policies also in southeastern Europe and in Turkey, I think, has to see very much also in this context of containing Russian and Chinese influence in Europe. There are also, I would like to very briefly mention economic interests. Of course, Germany's trade turnover with Turkey is more than twice as the French, 36 billion to 14 billion US dollars per year. And there are 7,000 German companies actively engaged in Turkey. There are only 500, some 500 of French origin. So, but there's also a strategic twist to that, which is both Germany and Turkey have business deals with Russia, which both countries are not willing to give up for the sake of smoother relations with the US. There's Turk Stream, of course, in the Black Sea. There's Nord Stream in the Baltic Sea. And in Turkey's case, there's the S-400 surface-to-air missiles. Merkel has very little understanding for the latter, but gas pipelines, as we all know, are not entirely alien to her mindset. So it's domestic. There's also the domestic impact, in which both countries differ, because Germany has 3 million citizens of Turkish descent, while and of course the German government has that always on their mind when they try to avoid frictions with Ankara, whereas Macron thinks more about his citizens from Northern Africa. So to conclude, I'd say this all explains why I believe at this point in time, multilateralism is probably the smallest common denominator for the alliance, because it allows at the same time for criticism of China's and Russia's foreign policy, while avoiding the impression that the West looks again for a kind of millennium-style regime change policy in these countries, as it was, as Putin and Xi Jinping had the impression in previous years. So, and it's also very hard, I think, to agree on principles of democracy with a country like Poland, for example, within the EU. So I think it's even more difficult outside of the alliance. What I think is very important to know, to conclude, is that the perils for Western democracy, I think, are much stronger from within the alliance, within several Western countries. And I think we will see that next year again when France goes to the polls. Germany will have elections this year. There is no strong candidate from the populist right. And I also believe that in all likelihood, there will be a new chancellor, a new CDU chancellor replacing Angela Merkel. But he will have to agree on foreign policy in a coalition, in all likelihood, with the Green Party. So, to sum up, I do not expect a fundamental change of German foreign policy in all these regards when Merkel leaves the office. Thank you very much.
Michael Thumann, thank you very much for a really very comprehensive, not assessment necessarily, but presentation of where Germany stands. I have a few questions for you. Does that mean, in everything you said, that the nature of the European Union, what it presumably stands for the German Chancellor, and since you talked about continuity, for the upcoming governments of Germany, aren't really that important? That is, you don't have the equivalent of making the world safe for EU's democracy. Making the world safe for democracy, that's the American line. You don't have that concern. And Merkel and obviously her successors, you suggest, think that the Union can actually continue to live as an island, although in that island as well, there are dangers stemming from countries like Poland and Hungary. Second, you're also suggesting, or at least that's the way I heard it, you're also suggesting that economic interests actually trump everything else, that Germany is not willing to compromise on economic matters for strategic reasons, for strategic calculations, even if at the cost of Westlessness, which is not going to be necessarily a very good future for Germany and German democracy either. Thirdly, at the end of the day, it appears that President Macron, when he met President Erdogan, came around, and the two sides have at least touched upon the possibility of cooperating in Syria and Libya, where they differed rather radically, and that were tempestuous back and forth, let's say, conversations between the two. So does that mean that whereas Germany overemphasizes economic interests and I suppose business interests, France does actually have a much more of a sense for strategic interests and outcomes? And are these two to be complementary, even if the government changes in France in May next year?
Thanks, Soli. Well, I think that maybe let me start out with your first question on the EU. I think there's a clear sense in Berlin that we have a serious problem within the EU with countries that try to limit the rule of law or even destroy the rule of law in order to maintain their grip on government. And we will also see, by the way, next year in Hungary, and Viktor Orban prepares for that already, to fend off this large alliance which is now being formed against him from the far right to the liberals and leftists. So and he looks out for measures, and of course the EU is closely following that. I think what from the Berlin perspective, I mean, they try to avoid a direct clash with Poland and Hungary. Over that, they let the EU do their work. It's the task of the EU, but clearly, of course, and Poland and Hungary know that of course Berlin pushes for that also behind the scenes, with other states, because they all see it as a threat. And the question is, if in addition to that, the whole world should be made safe for democracy. And I think that is the difference. And there is still a strong hangover in several European countries from the 2000s, when the West tried to make the world safe for democracy. And also we go through a period of reckoning with different missions, both in Afghanistan, and now we see the latest developments in the Sahel zone in Northern Africa, where France withdraws, and basically probably the UN mission will also be cut down to size. So I expect a similar development there in Mali and in the Sahel zone of limited engagement and giving up on the idea that we can build states which are, well, let's say safe for not only safe for democracy, but just stable states. Economic interest plays an important role, but I think it is in Germany we have passed this threshold of thinking only being basically thinking about economic interests which trump everything else. I think there's a strategic interest which has come in addition to that, which is, and I think the year when this has changed was 2014. It was the year when Crimea was annexed and Eastern Ukraine was invaded. And that was the first time when the German government clearly announced that, well, no, there is not economy first and über alles, but there are also other considerations. And this is basically why Germany then gave up on its economic interests vis-a-vis Russia, because the economic sanctions of the EU against Russia are, of course, primarily German sanctions against Russia. So And I believe that in German, there is also a strategic part to that. I think it's a mistaken strategic consideration of Nord Stream 2. But the strategic consideration is we should have some kind of a bridge, as the federal president recently called it once more, a bridge to Russia, which would ensure that there is a basis, a fundament of relations on which we can build other things, and where both parties, both countries would have an interest in. And not only economic, but a strategic interest, that this has to be maintained. I don't think that this works anymore because Russia has changed so fundamentally in its strategic outlook. But and also, of course, because it has other options, the Turk Stream and Nord Stream both play with each other, so they have to be seen in context. But anyway, so there is this strategic twist to it. Secondly, I think that also in Northern Africa, where Macron and Erdogan have differed. Macron has also differed with Germany, particularly in Libya, because Germany was very critical of the support of General Haftar provided by France. And this is why Germany then 1.5 years ago came up with this Libya conference in order to bring about another process, which would rather deviate from the logic of we support this party or that party. So I think if you put all the three approaches in the case of Libya together, France supporting Haftar for a while, then Erdogan supporting the government in Tunis, and the German approach, and what we see recently in Libya, maybe it hasn't contradiction. There is a contradiction, of course, but lots of contradictions, but maybe it has worked in the right direction. We'll see. Okay. But I believe there is a mixture. I wrap up. I believe there is a mixture of economic and strategic concerns today. So the sole reduction on economic interest, I think, is not the true analysis anymore.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael Thuman. Dr. Funda Tekin, welcome again. How do you see September? Do you see it as nothing but continuity in German foreign policy in particular? Or do you differ from Michael Thuman's assessment that whoever comes to replace Chancellor Merkel, who is actually a very conservative politician and not lured by grand strategic visions, or at least that's how I see her record, do you think this will be the order of the day? That is, she may be out of the picture, but her shadow will remain because she does indeed represent Germany. And how does that reflect on German EU relations, EU-Turkey, and Turkey-German relations as well?
Well, thank you, Soli. Thank you for the question. And I think I can rightly continue where Michael also has ended. Because first of all, I share his assessment that it is still highly unlikely to perceive, because we don't have a crystal ball, how the general elections are going to turn out, what the exact result is going to be likely. But I actually share his assessment with regards to, what we can say on very sure assumptions, so to speak. It's going to be, I think the grand coalition era is over. We might have a CDU chancellor, but I think also it's very safe to assume that we're going to have a participation of the Greens in the government, and that might, of course, change a bit also the foreign policy of Germany, because, of course, the Greens do have a different stance on that. But how this then actually is going to play out with regards to government constellations, I think this rests to be seen. But given this circumstance, I think we can still make some assumptions with regards to German EU-Turkey policy even after the Merkel era. And as you said, the Merkel era Merkel is going to have her legacy, but we're going to see on how much continuity is within that. And I think my general hypothesis also would be that we are going to see some continuation with regards to, I called it strong headwinds for EU-Turkey relations, but not necessarily only because of the change in German government, but more because of the given circumstances. And I think I can make that clear by three thoughts and a line of thoughts that I think are important to consider if you consider German Turkey and EU-Turkey, German EU-Turkey relations. And this is first, I think that governments generally face a dilemma if they, or trilemma even, if they deal with EU-Turkey relations and also the bilateral relationship, because first of all, they have to respond to the general mood within the German public. And here it has increasingly become critical vis-a-vis Turkey, and more particularly vis-a-vis the EU membership of Turkey. And at the same time, the governments do not want to upset the German Turkish voters, because as Michael also rightly said, we have 3 million people of Turkish origin living in Germany, and their votes, of course, count. So I think this is also something to consider. And then also, I think here also comes into play Turkey's diaspora policy that also then render concepts of integration, the provision of religious services, extraterritorial voting, and election campaigning as critical issues on a bilateral political agenda. And I think the example that now, I think after 11 years, finally, the first German school for imams has been opened, and that was also, a big news in Germany, might also be a sign for that. And I also think that the Kurdish diaspora also plays a role, because, the Kurdish issue then also transfers right into the streets of Germany. But then there's the third aspect that governments need to consider, and this is actually, risking to alienate Turkey as an economic and strategic partner. Michael Thumann already highlighted the close bilateral economic relationship, and also, how important economics are. And it is also the question of, what is the expectation of Turkey with regards to Germany's positions. And here, of course, there are expectations within the economic realm, but also in the realm of fighting terrorism. And then there are, of course, the issues of how compatible the different positions are with regards to defining who is a terrorist organization and who is not, or even with regards to the overall constitution of the EU-Turkey relationship. The privileged partnership is a example for also being a stone of contention. So, I think that when you then look into the, and this is my second point, into the party politics and how different political parties actually deal with this trilemma, you can say that they deal differently with it. For example, for the Social Democrats, Turkish-German votes might be more important than for the Christian Democrats, for example, simply because of the history of the electoral behavior of the Turkish diaspora. But if you then look at the party manifestos and also the electoral campaigns, and of course it is the fact that not all political party manifestos have been published yet, but we have draft versions of it. And if you also look at previous party manifestos, you can say that across the board of political parties, there is a critical stance on Turkey, and an increasingly critical stance on Turkey for different reasons. But, and I think if you then look at the current draft political manifestos, you can also see that this has rather solidified. So for me, it's very interesting to see what the Social Democrats are saying, or rather not saying, because I think they have a very short short paragraph on Turkey in their draft electoral party manifesto. And I think this is rather interesting, giving the stance that the Social Democrats, rather positive stance towards Turkey that the Social Democrats so far had. So I think this is really something to take into account. And then with regards to the Greens, they have a strong emphasis on democratic values and rule of law, and this is going to have an effect, of course, on their stance also towards Turkey, and also with regards to the policy files that they find important, which is visa liberalization, and then also the migration file. I think this is also going to play out. So with this observation, I think we can basically say that there is maybe a stance or continuity in German EU-Turkey policy with regards to being more critical, and I think we can expect that to also be the stance of the future German government. And it's very likely that they are not going to promote Turkish accession to the EU, but this is nothing new because also the current government had it in their coalition agreement that they would not, they would rest the file as it is. Secondly, and this is also what Michael Thumann said, is he only said that Merkel's narrative was more on the geostrategic aspect or geostrategic side, and perceiving Turkey as a geostrategic partner. But then if you also look at the debates in the Bundestag over the past years, you can also see that there's rather a conversion of narratives across all political parties, that they focus more on the geostrategic relevance and Turkey as a geostrategic partner, instrumentalizing the accession negotiations rather in order to realign, as an argument for realigning an important geostrategic partner. And that might be in line with the dual twin track strategy approach that we currently witness with regards to the European Union. But I think this is a third point, that a bilateral cooperation between Germany and Turkey, as well as EU and Turkey, are going to be important for certain policy areas, and also with regards then to Germany's Turkey agenda. And this is the migration file, this is visa liberalization. And as I said, I think we can expect some sort of continuity. I expect that the German government is more gonna focus again on the democratic values and to bring that more into the agenda, but maybe this is rather a recommendation that I would have for the German government rather than an expectation, because I think it's highly important to kind of put the democratic values and the rule of law issues again in the focus of the agenda, and not only the geostrategic one, but this is something to be seen. And then it's, this is my final thought. And I think, so strong headwinds for Turkey, but not necessarily only due to the German general elections.
Thank you. It really is a very comprehensive presentation on those relations, but it really brought a question to my mind. And just tell me if you agree with me, if I'm wrong. That is, there is no German strategy on the part of anyone, either the state or the parties, about how to manage Turkey. Would that be a fair assessment?
Well, no, I would not. No, I would not say that, because as I just said, my point rather was that there might be less differences between individual party positions, but I think there is a strategy with regards to preserving bilateral relations, and
that's not a strategy, though. As far as I'm concerned, that is.
Well, but at least it's an approach, so to speak. And then I think that the issue of having the rule of law issue, something is at least something that is important. And if you want to speak, it's more the geostrategic approach that has been the strategy of the past years, to kind of align and deal with a geostrategic partner with regards to that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Hans Kudnani, About a month ago, Thomas Klein-Brockhoff, formerly an advisor to the previous German president and head of GMF Berlin, wrote an article that said Biden's 100 days of solitude. And his point was Biden extended a hand and it was left hanging in the void. My hearing of what Michael Tuman has said about those series of meetings is that if Klein-Brockhoff was to write the article again, he would have to say 130 days of solitude. Would you agree with that assessment? And secondly, you wrote a piece entitled European Sovereignty Without Strategic Autonomy. Do you still stick to that view? And in view of what Biden tries to accomplish, in view of the desire, at least in NATO, to actually put China as the strategically most important matter in front of the Western alliance, how is that all going to work? And do you fear that at some point the Americans might say, okay, we really don't need the Europeans to deal with the Chinese. We'll just go on our own, and if they want to come to help us, welcome, but otherwise we will not spend more time, energy, effort.
Thanks, Soli. These are really good questions, quite difficult questions. Let me see if I can sort of.
But you're a man of great difficulties, you know.
Thanks, Soli. So actually, let me start by, because I think what you're getting at is essentially Germany's role in this shifting transatlantic relationship with increasing focus on China, and Biden coming in as president. So I'll sort of come back to that. Let me start though by saying that when I saw the title for this webinar, will the two wolf warriors of Europe destroy the transatlantic alliance? Initially, I wasn't sure who these two wolf warriors were that you were talking about. And I have to say, the first thought that occurred to me, partly because this is the Berlin Bosphorus initiative, is that you were talking about Germany and Turkey. And it seems to me actually that in some ways that makes more sense than Russia and Turkey, because after all, Russia is not a NATO ally. It's structurally completely different in relation to the transatlantic alliance than Turkey is. Whereas Germany and Turkey are both members of NATO, and it seems to me, from a US perspective, two very difficult allies.
Okay.
So I think actually the parallels between Germany and Turkey are quite striking in this respect, in relation to the transatlantic alliance. And Michal has already sort of touched on this a little bit. So let me try and spell it out a little bit more. I mean, I can remember being in Istanbul and Ankara in the autumn of 2019, and I think I saw you there, Soli. And this was the time when there's big controversy over the Turkish incursions into northern Syria. In fact, I think the time that I was there, Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo were in Ankara, literally at the same time to try to negotiate around this. And I remember coming back on the flight to London and thinking, precisely in a way, this thought that these are the two difficult allies, Germany and Turkey. And in particular, that it's, the threat to NATO is a sort of combination of German free riding and Turkish freewheeling. Right now, you can all tell me, that this is wrong, and that either I'm being unfair to Turkey or unfair to Germany. But I think it's quite striking, particularly because, as Michal said, Germany and Turkey do also have these slightly analogous relationships with Russia, right? So in the German case, Nord Stream 2. And in the Turkish case, the S-400s. And so there's, I think, a way in which, and this is sort of what I was kind of driving at with this parallel, there's a way in which Germany and Turkey both want to have it both ways within the transatlantic alliance. And, to put it in terms of this phrase that now has entered, British political kind of discourse, they both want to have their cake and eat it. And this brings me directly to your question, Soli, about Biden and about Biden's kind of attempt to restore the transatlantic relationship, in particular with this focus on Germany, and then how Germany and the EU have responded to that. And I do see it in the terms that I described in that piece that you kindly mentioned, Soli, that what's happened, I think, my reading of the last sort of 4 or 5 years, is that what happened after Trump became US president in 2016 was that there was this sort of sudden panic among European countries, and in particular Germany, about the uncertainty about the US security guarantee. And out of that immediately came this momentum behind the idea of strategic autonomy, pushed in particular by the French. Obviously, it was an older idea, but it really started to gain momentum after 2016. And then a couple of years later, and I should say that idea of strategic autonomy focused very much on military power. And on, as I say, this uncertainty about the US security guarantee to Europe and whether Europeans needed to develop some kind of plan B. Then a couple of years later, this concept of European sovereignty emerges, and it focuses much more around economic policy. And in particular, the momentum around European sovereignty was kind of a response to the tariffs that the Trump administration imposed, with some secondary impact on Europeans. And then also the sanctions against Iran that the Trump administration imposed, which again had a secondary impact on Europeans. And this really galvanized this kind of idea of European sovereignty, that we have to be able to, in economic policy, do what we want, essentially. And so what I think is fairly clear now, 5 years on, is that Europeans want to have it both ways. It's absolutely clear that Europeans are not going to become autonomous in terms of security policy. They're going to continue to depend on the United States for their security. And, to a large extent, because that's what Germany wants, the French would quite like to become independent of the United States in security terms. Germany absolutely doesn't want to. I would suggest, rather cynically, because it doesn't want to spend money. And it certainly doesn't want to exchange a kind of dependence on the United States for its security for a dependence on France for its security, because that would open up all kinds of really difficult questions about what France would want in return for providing a security guarantee to Germany. So the French would quite like strategic autonomy, but the EU, precisely because of the German position, I would argue, is saying we want to continue to remain dependent on the United States for our security. At the same time, we want to be able to do our own thing in economic policy. And you saw that very clearly with, in particular, the China investment agreement that right. Merkel personally pushed, before it was, torpedoed by the European Parliament, which was, really, I think, made that very explicit that Germany, and by extension, the EU, want to sort of have it both ways. So that's kind of roughly where I think we are. And for me, the big question was, would the Biden administration allow the Germans and the Europeans to have it both ways, to continue to depend on the United States for their security, and be really difficult on some of these economic questions? And it seems as if the answer to that is yes, they will. Because they're so desperate to restore the transatlantic relationship, and in particular the relationship with Germany, because it's sort of the opposite of Trump's approach. And I think that's largely what's guiding the Biden administration to be the anti-Trump administration.
Is that enough? I mean, because you did not answer the question I asked. Was all that just a show, a big, magnificent, glorious show with nothing to show at the end?
What was a show?
G7, Atlantic Charter, NATO, the EU-US summit, because again, it's not my job to, I'm not going to be a panelist, but I'm wondering if the Americans will keep on accommodating the Europeans forever. As I said, it seems to me they don't need them for China, which is the big thing.
This is
now, there is a good question. I might as well ask it to you now rather than later, by Tuberk Samur. Merkel once said, do we want to make Russia dependent on China or rely on China to import its natural gas? Is that in our European interest? Doesn't this already imply a vision of grand strategy that neglects the interests of Eastern European countries that neighbored Russia for the sake of Western Europe? And he says, I mean, in terms of Nord Stream 2. Michael, you may also step in briefly if you want to answer that. Please, Hans.
Thanks, Soli, for reminding me of that question that I hadn't fully answered about, does there come a point where the United States says we don't need the Europeans to deal with China, as you say, that actually, regional partners in Asia, the Japanese and other treaty allies, but ultimately in the end, I think India are way more important than Europeans are. That's true. But I think this comes to a question which has been running through our entire discussion, which is whether you think about the current conjuncture in international politics in realist terms or in ideological terms. Because I think that what's happened in US foreign policy since Biden took over from Trump is that you'd already had this bipartisan shift in the consensus in Washington on China towards a much more hawkish approach towards China. But during the Trump era, that was largely framed in realist terms. This is great power competition between China and the United States. They didn't quite say this, but declining power, rising power, sort of classic realist kind of stuff. What I think the Biden administration has done, and again, this is partly because of their reflexive anti-Trumpian and the way that the sort of 4 years of Trump has just, I think, made policymakers in DC look at things in an extremely kind of myopic kind of way. They've reframed the strategic competition in ideological terms as a global struggle between democracies and authoritarianism. Now, if you see it that way, then I think it completely changes the way you think about Europeans' role in that struggle. I think you're less likely then to give up on Europeans because you think they're really essential. I mean, there are also some other technical ways in which Europeans are quite important on, economic policy around tech, even though Europeans aren't, as close to China geographically as India and Japan are. In some ways, they are important on some of those questions. I think it's not quite as simple as saying they don't matter in Asia. But I think this is largely, one of the, I think, interesting things is I think that both Merkel and Biden are looking at international politics in this slightly ideological way. Now, I think it's all very simplistic, and I agree with a lot of what Michal said. But I have to say, I think thinking about democracy and authoritarianism in Europe in this very binary way is also too simplistic. So the idea, for example, that, I agree with you, Michal, that the threats to democracy are from within. They're not from, it's ultimately not the Chinese or the Russians. However, to frame it in terms of the only threats to democracy in Europe are Hungary and Poland and the populists, I think is just too easy. It seems to me that there are some other threats, in particular, technocracy is also a threat to democracy in Europe. And by the way, I think populism is to a large extent a response to technocracy. This brings in a big question about the EU. The EU, whether, you were talking about, the extent to which member states are democracies, Hungary and so on. But I think it's very difficult to describe the EU itself as a democracy. It's undemocratic, non-democratic. There are various ways of thinking about it, but it's not democratic. So that's one point. And then I think the other thing that one has to say when one talks about this is, until about 5 minutes ago, Fidesz was in the European People's Party, Merkel's grouping in the European Parliament. It's quite difficult to take action against Hungary and Poland, through the EU, but it would have been very easy to kick Fidesz out of the EPP. And so I think that, to me, just complicates the idea that somehow this is a very binary thing, liberalism against illiberalism, Merkel against Orban. It's much more complicated, I think.
Very briefly, Michael, if you want to say, because I want to get on to.
Very briefly. Thank you, Hans, for adding this. And in fact, you're right. This is not binary, but in fact, there are many. Also, I think there are threats emanating from Germany with the AfD in France and other countries, and in the EU bureaucracy as well. There are huge problems causing other populist nationalist problems. That's entirely true. Very briefly to the Nord Stream issue and the strategic impact of it. I think that there were always in German-Russian trade relations, there was this strategic consideration that, well, there was the old Helmut Schmidt idea that those who trade do not wage war, and better we import also gas from Russia, then it would all go to China, and there would be a problematic relationship between these two powers. I think these considerations where those of the past, they are not valid anymore today, although they are being reiterated by German politicians here every time and again. I think gas, which goes to Europe, it's mostly located in Western Siberia. China gets gas from the eastern parts of Siberia. So it's a clearly geographic issue there. And I think the whole issue also will be diluted by the upcoming renewables when all of Europe will need less gas, and China is going in the same direction. So here's a huge problem coming up for Russia, which is why they are thinking about hydrofuels and other things already now.
Okay, thank you. Well, Güven Sak, you are the only Turk on the panel. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Funda Tekin is German Turk. You are the only Turkish Turk on the panel.
Only economist, let's say.
And but the thing is, your economic analyses have a lot of politics in them. So is Germany jealous of Turkey? Now, based on what you also heard, is it going to be always possible to keep Turkey at bay politically, as the CDU always, or Mrs. Merkel has always wanted, but engage it economically? And can Turkey really, on its own part, really get engaged or wish to be engaged economically with the European Union, particularly when it is under economic stress, and not necessarily follow its political conditions? In a way, can we say that despite all the protestations, Turkey has been pretty comfortable with the idea of a special partnership, if not necessarily the use of the term special partnership, and that is the German preference, and it may very well be the preference of many European countries? And how do we go from here to the new economy, the green economy? Can Turkey make the adjustment? And if Turkey doesn't make the adjustment, what does that mean in terms of Turkish EU and Turkish-German relations?
Okay, so many questions over there. So let me start with the fact that since the accession process stalled, I think the engagement between the EU and Turkey, with Germany and Turkey, everything has stopped as far as I see. So I see the economic dimension together with the political dimension here, because Turkish transformation, has been achieved with close connection with Europe. Turkey has turned into an industrial country with the customs union protecting us from East Asian competition. I think it helped Turkey a lot in transforming itself. But then with the succession process and its its problems, especially since, let's say, 2007. So it has been a lot of years. I think there is no real engagement process that's going on between the EU and Turkey. That's why we had in the past with the Commission this, we have been looking for a positive agenda. We have been looking for ways to find a way of engagement. But I think now with this Green Deal, with this green transformation on the ground, with its geopolitical ramifications also, with its industrial policy implications, with its trade implications. Now, I think we have a strong agenda for a shared vision for the future for the first time. It's possible to define something for the region with this Green Deal agenda, I think. And all those other countries that were mentioned here are going to be, in fact, Mikhail has mentioned a little bit about the possibilities, but I think those geopolitical ramifications are going to be real, and those are not going to diminish the importance of Turkey in this region. It's going to enhance the importance of Turkey in this region. Because, you know, if you look at the countries around Turkey, from Russia down to the Gulf, there are many countries that are producing oil in this region, and they are going to be directly influenced by this transformation process. So it all depends on how we are seeing, how central we are seeing this importance of Green Deal or Green New Deal, as the Americans on the other side of the Atlantic are talking about. I think this is a kind of a new trading bloc, trading region that's taking place. And the old customs union framework that we had with the EU has come to an end now, effectively, has effectively come to an end now. So there is the need to define something new. And this new thing hasn't started anew, because in 2015, this transition from a single market to a digital single market has already started within the EU. The Commission has many papers regarding that, but the nature of trade, international trade, is changing. For the visible trade relations, we need a strong backbone of digital backbone now, and digital rules, kind of digital governance rules also at the same time. So I think the nature of trade is changing, and now with this border carbon equalization tax, etc., all those other things, and also with the new technological changes that might be possible, I think the vision for the near future is going to change dramatically, as far as I see. If this thing is going to change, if we believe that there is now a new shared vision for the future, I think then we can place Turkey into some place and discuss about these issues. Regarding whether Turkey could do it, because it's obvious that after this G7 summit and all these issues becoming Green New Deal type of discussions becoming more important, Turkey cannot ignore the fact that, you know, 60% of our exports are going to G7 countries. So Turkey needs to change. And there is a short list of things to do regarding that. The first one is to ratify the Paris Accord. Turkey is now, after Libya announcing that they are going to ratify it, Turkey, we are now 5, I think, together with Turkey. So I think we are going to ratify that. And then there is the need to prepare a more serious package for the intentions for carbon emissions. That requires a kind of a new economic program. But this, regarding the engagement, a more structured engagement, I think, and starting the customs union modernization discussions as quickly as possible now, I think is going to be the most visible and positive step in the right direction. So when you look at it from the angle of, you know, all those discussions that I heard before, it's going to be basically about the economy, but it's not going to be about the economy. It's going to be about, you know, deciding, thinking about that shared vision together with our European partners. I think that's a good step in the right direction. And as far as I see from here, what's happening in Brussels nowadays, I think there is an opening for starting that process, the customs union modernization process. I think it's going to be very useful in the near future to also for Turkey to define mechanisms to adjust to this new world. Because, you know, all these technologies regarding for lowering carbon emissions, we know those technologies before, but this is the first time that it is possible for the world to achieve a non-carbon based growth process. That's why the Chinese also have agreed with that, because this is a new technological revolution that's going to take shape very quickly, as far as I see, by the help of this, by the help of these new trading rules. And I think Turkey needs to take place within that framework. And maybe because I'm a naive economist, I'm a little bit optimistic about the near future in terms of EU-Turkey relations, because of the fact that, you know, we need a shared vision for the future. And now it is possible to have that shared vision, not only for Turkey-EU relations, but also for our relations with the near around, let's say, because all those countries are also going to adjust. And I think Turkey is going to have an important role to play for the transformation of this region, for the industrial transformation of this region too at the same time. And if you look at the refugee issue from this angle, we are not going to see less refugees in the future with this transformation going forward. We are going to see more refugees. We are going to see more failed states in the region. So I think that brings us into a new geopolitical environment also to think about. If this Green Deal process is going to move forward in the way it is designed today on both sides of the Atlantic, and I think it all depends on the fact that post-virus recovery process is going to depend on these public investments for these new technologies. So I think it's going to be here to stay. So we need to adjust, I think, to this new situation.
What will it take for Turkey to start that?
Sorry?
What will it take for Turkey to actually start its own transformation and for the Europeans to recognize that in a way, trying to keep Turkey at bay is going to be counterproductive?
No, I think what Turkey needs to do, first of all, we need to show that we understand this new trading bloc that's taking shape on both sides of the Atlantic. And that starts with the ratification of the Paris Climate Accord, despite all those discussions about Annex 1, all those protests against Annex 1, Turkey being considered as a developed country. We need to ratify that as quickly as possible. We need to have a forward-looking agenda for lowering net carbon emissions by 2050 again. We need to have a strong program this time. And I think the important issue is to be ready also to start the customs union modernization process. Turkey needs to take some small steps in order to make that happen. And I think it is possible to do that. So I'm optimistic, quite optimistic about that.
Funda Hanım, is there any political party in Germany that actually looks forward in the sense that Güvensak has identified? And do they at all think about Turkey in that sense? Because that requires to see Turkey as, again, a partner, as he said, and maybe a way to salvation rather than a continuing nuisance.
Yes, I mean, this was what was going through my head when I was listening, because in general, I would actually fully support and encourage such a more content-related approach for kind of setting EU-Turkey relations on a different track. So I think this is really important. What is very sensitive, I think we need to make sure that politics is not getting in the way. And I think the one thing is, of course, if you then know that Germany was among, the leading group that stopped the modernization of the customs union for political reasons, I think this is really something to consider. And I think this stance has rather softened with regards to the German position. So I think they would rather be open for starting such a process. But I think we also have to think about other actors than only Germany. And this is what I always called the elephant in the room, and that is the Cyprus issue. And I think we have talked about, lots of issues and areas, but, the situation in the Mediterranean and really solving the Cyprus issue, because this also, if it then comes to modernization of the customs union, this requires unanimous decision. So you have to get everyone on board. And if that issue is not solved, I think it's really, we have to make sure that we do not promise an end goal, but rather focus on the process maybe in order to get things started.
Güvensak, are German companies operating in Turkey engaged in that kind of thinking? Because I mean, for Bosch or for a Siemens, for a Mercedes, Turkey is an important production place.
Sure.
And they do, and as Michael said, there is a lot of German private investment in Turkey. And if they want to stay, if they have an interest in staying, don't they have to get engaged in that debate that you mentioned as well, that they should also push both their own governments and the Turkish government, which constantly says it values foreign direct investment, that it has to move, and rather fast, in that direction, and tell the Europeans that maybe to stall on the new customs union agreement is not necessarily a good idea.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Turkey is part of, especially part of, German value chains. So, you know, there are important investments, German investments inside Turkey. And with this transformation now going on in Europe, of course, Turkey needs to adjust for the sake of those countries too at the same time. And also, it is also important for Turkey to get more foreign direct investment. You know, if these value chains are going to be reorganized, if there is going to be a kind of an attitude, a negative attitude developing towards China, it might be, you know, possible. That's what the German companies are talking about that are operating in Turkey. It might be understandable for some of those value chains, for some of those production activities to be relocated to Turkey also at the same time, because of the proximity issues. You know, we are very near to the EU market. That's why we have this, you know, close link with the EU market. And I think the German companies, they would like to be in a position to do that. But I think that goes beyond the German companies, if you ask me. Because if the geopolitical ramifications are going to be real, then there is also a kind of a geostrategic interest, should be a geostrategic interest. It's kind of Turkey becoming the southern flank of NATO once more again, you know, with all those countries beyond going through rapid transformations, including Russia, I think, because Russia is the weakest link, I think, here in terms of its economy. So if you look at it from that angle, I think the German companies that are already in Turkey, they have a strong interest for Turkey to be in part of this customs union, in a kind of a new customs union modernization process, which includes a green transformation inside. I think that's important now for Turkey to go through. But it is also, I think beyond that, it's also important. Maybe we are not, you know, yet assessing the geopolitical impact yet, but I think it's going to be real because it's already happening. I mean, look at all the countries that are around Turkey. They already have, nearly all of them have kind of transformation programs for 2030, 2035, 2040. They know what's coming on, because this is a new age where with these new technologies, the link between carbon emissions and growth is going to be broken effectively at the end of the day. And I think the reason for this Green Deal or Green New Deal taking shape on both sides of the Atlantic is to foster the technological prominence, importance of the West also. First of all, the Americans, and then the West also. That's the reason why there is this focus, there is this new agenda for the post-virus recovery process, I think.
Thank you. There is a question from Alper Uçok, and I guess more for Michael Tuman and Hans Kundnani. How would you evaluate Turkey's attempt to contain Russia for Europe in Ukraine via its UACVs, in the Baltics via its air force, and in Libya and Syria via its ground force, and its key role in curbing migration towards the EU as the EU-Turkey migration deal ends? Now, I suppose he means, is this there to stay? And if it is there to stay, there should there not be more of a common agenda that goes beyond the immediate need to curb the migration? Michael?
Yeah, let me start with very briefly on the migration deal. I think both sides have an interest there. And the fact that Erdogan's policies at the border in the beginning of 2020 did not work, and he had basically to withdraw the refugees from the border, they show that both sides have to agree on a new deal, and it works in the interest of both parts. Very interesting, and thank you for the question about Ukraine. I think this is a new development. It has been going on since 2 or 3 years, in fact, but Zelensky in particular, he did a lot. He came 3 times to Istanbul and Ankara. And so this is a way for Turkey to get more independence of Russia and basically dilute the deals it has struck with Russia over the past years. They do it in 2 ways. One is they have other sources of gas. Turkey's dependence on Russian gas supply has been diminished in the past 2 years. But also what is very true is that the strategic dependence in the region, by virtue of establishing close ties with Azerbaijan during the Azeri-Armenian conflict, being on the other side in Libya, but also with this very important, and I think it's the most important and overlooked factor, is Ukraine and the UAVs, yes, but there are also other military procurement deals between Turkey and Russia. I think this is very important, and it has not gone unnoticed in Russia. And so this is how Erdogan can display his own independent stance vis-a-vis Russia in the region. Very important.
Hans? Well, I mean, if you could also add, if I might add to this question, it is in the NATO declaration that Ukraine's membership in NATO is in play. Now, how did Germany sign on to that as well?
Okay, let me come to that in a minute. This question on Turkey, though, is really interesting because, so my reading of the implication is that it's sort of pointing out that Turkey is a security provider for Europe. And, you know, I just think no one in the EU sees it that way. Rightly or wrongly, they just don't. And by the way, don't take it personally, because people in the EU also don't see the UK as a security provider for Europe. Apart from if you go to Estonia, where there are British troops as part of Operation Enhanced Forward Presence, if you talk to Germans and say you actually depend on Britain for your security, most Germans will look at you like, you know, they don't understand what you're talking about. So, you know, that's a long way of saying people in the EU are not very good at recognizing, you know, who their security, who is providing security for them. Maybe just a word on the EU-Turkey migration deal, because I think it is really important. I mean, I was thinking earlier on, Soli, as you were talking about the lack of a European strategy, German strategy. You know, from my outsider perspective, and feel free to contradict me, Michael or Funda, if you disagree, but from my perspective, the German strategy towards Turkey is very, very clear and has been since 2015. We will do anything. We will stop refugees coming by any means necessary. That's the German strategy towards Turkey. I think it's overwhelmingly the German interest in relation to Turkey. And one final thing I think I should add on that is I think this may not be apparent from if you're looking at this from Turkey, but I think looking back now 6 years on from 2015, I think this has been a critical juncture in the history of the European Union. The European Union changed after 2015. And it's, you know, this is a different EU now. I've written quite a lot about this. I've talked about the civilizational turn in the European project. There's a defensive civilizationalism, which I think has now become quite powerful in the EU as a consequence of what happened in 2015. And that has huge implications for Turkey, because I think there was always this way in which Europeanness was to some extent defined against, Turkey was historically as sort of the other for European identity. But I think now that these civilizational elements are becoming even more powerful within the EU, and you see this, for example, in the concept of, the Commissioner for promoting the European way of life, whose job it is to keep out migrants. I mean, this is, I think, a very disturbing civilizational turn in the EU. And as I say, I think that makes it very difficult to think about the kind of creative partnership between the EU and Turkey that you were talking about, Soli. And then finally, you asked me about the accession of Ukraine to the EU. Well, I mean, it's not going to happen. Your question, I think, was how Germany signed up to it.
Yeah, because it is part of the 79 articles of the NATO final statement. And
when did that happen?
Just on Monday.
Oh, I see. Yes.
It's among the 79 articles of the NATO statement.
I see. I see that as being essentially.
I mean, Georgia is now, okay, we will help you, we will cooperate with you and all that, but Ukraine's membership is actually still in process, was the article. I don't remember.
I think it's meaningless. I think it's my reading would be that it's another of these sort of European or NATO compromises. Obviously, the Baltic states and the Poles would have pushed this, and it's a compromise, but it's not going anywhere. That would be my reading. I don't know, Michal, if you agree, but
is that so, Michael?
As long as Ukraine is divided in such a way, and this is of course what Putin looks forward to, that Ukraine remains divided, I think Ukraine will not join NATO nor membership action programs or anything, unfortunately.
I mean, can't we put it in the same category as Turkish accession to the EU? In theory, that's still on the table as well, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, right. But of course, in this case, there's no other power interfering in these ways. And of course, Russia's support of the separatists is intended to thwart any aspiration of Ukraine for NATO. That's the problem.
And at any rate, we don't in principle use the term never for Turkey-EU relations. Okay, there's another question. In March 2020, Tuber Samur again, in March 2020, the leader of the Greens, Annalena Baerbock, said that EU-Turkey refugee deal was a failed agreement and stressed the need for change, learning from past mistakes. What's the perspective of the Greens? This is for you, Funda Tekin. What's the perspective of the Greens on this possible revision? And regarding the EU-Turkey migration cooperation, what might be their influence if they are a coalition partner in the next German government?
Well, I think that the position of the Greens is that they are generally critical with regards to the agreements of the EU with third countries, and they want to have a more rule of law, democratic focus with regards to that, and they also would want to make sure that refugees and asylum seekers get their rights. So in general, they criticize more, the pushback policy that you can witness with regards to the European Union and the new pact on migration and asylum policy. And so I would expect them to also kind of, if you reform the migration deal, to make sure that it's in line with international law standards, that you have also the rights of the refugees more in the focus, and that this is then more put on solid grounds. But I mean, also referring that to Hans with regards to the strategy of the Germany only solely focusing on Turkey's function to keeping away refugees. I think this is of course since 2015 an important part of Germany's strategy, but it would be too short-sighted, I think, to only reduce that to this one core policy field, because as I said, the relations are more complex, and you do have other dimensions like the economic dimension or the social dimensions that really feed into the bilateral relationship, and then of course also have a play and a say in with regards to the German position. So I mean, if you would want to have then a strategy with regards to EU-Turkey, maybe it's more the realpolitik approach. You know, you have to then react to crisis and find your and tie your partnerships within that. But I think also if you then look at the time in 2015, there was also the intensification of bilateral relationship with Turkey. So I think it would be too short-sighted to only focus it on the EU refugee.
Would you not agree though, Funda, that it's by far the most important factor driving German policy towards Turkey?
Well, I mean, if you then, I mean, I agree that it's an important factor, but if you then look at the reason when Germany changed, you know, fundamentally its Turkey policy, I think it was in 2017, and there it was more related to the human rights situation in Turkey, to the German nationals actually being, you know, taken in prison to prison in Turkey. So that was actually the moment when the German government started also to change its policy towards Turkey on a national basis. So as I said, you know, it's an important factor, but I would not call it out as the most important factor.
As time is getting shorter, to Hans, Ambassador Murat Ersavcı says, Turkey does provide security for EU. Actually, you did say that. And he says one simple example would be Syria, the other Afghanistan, and even if you forgot the Balkans, these realities remain, and I suppose you'd agree. Then Barçın İnanç, for Michael and Hans, I guess. Can we have some comments on German policy on Libya and Afghanistan? To what degree there is convergence with Turkish policies?
I think that's one for you, Michal. It's beyond, I think that's slightly beyond my expertise.
I think there is convergence insofar as both countries have an interest in consolidating the two countries, and both are auxiliaries in some ways, particularly, of course, in the mission in Afghanistan to American policy. And they both also depend in Afghanistan on what the Americans do, or in this case now when they withdraw. But I think as far as Libya is concerned, they differ strongly in so far as Turkey has chosen as I said previously, to support only one party in the war, and it's actually altered the war theater by
it happens to be the UN recognized government, the party you said.
And it was, yes, of course, it was the UN recognized government. And here's again some kind of convergence, because there was the then UN envoy Martin Kobler, who also advocated working with the UN recognized government. And of course, all of this now in this process, this diplomatic process, has evolved into the new government and hopefully elections and all of that. So basically, they were coming from two different sides, but in the end, the result might be very similar to what both sides have intended.
Okay, I have very short questions for you because we have 6 minutes. From the German side, Michael and Funda, how much do the German political elites and societal elites either know or understand Turkish society? Do they ever have an intention in investing Turkish society apart from basically encouraging brain drain for an aging population that needs particularly digital skills, or which part of the Turkish population produces quite a number? Güven Sak, for you, let's say if things don't work out with the European Union, can Turkey rely on China in one fashion or another to have its economy lifted up? Is that a possibility? And finally, for Hans, can we say, or should we say, after all our discussion and everything that had happened, and we don't know what had transpired in the Biden-Putin summit, that all the problems that were there on the 8th of June are still there? Let's start with Güven Sak. We'll go
No,
on reverse.
the short answer is no. It's not
Okay.
possible for Turkey to float its economy in close connection with either with China, I mean, and Russia is out of the question.
Yeah.
Because we know structurally we have current account deficits. There's a savings deficit in Turkey. And we would like to stay like this. I mean, it's a structural issue. It's not possible to solve it very quickly. And the most liquid market is still the US dollar market, and access to that market, I think, is of prime importance to Turkey. So, I mean, it's not about, you know, the civilizational or other things, but it's pure economics, and it's not possible to for Turkey to survive in any manner. I mean, it's not possible.
Okay, thank you. Hans?
Yes, again, a short answer is yes. I think all the problems are still there, and I think in a sense, if we come back to NATO, you know, which is sort of where we started the Transatlantic Alliance, this sort of comes to something that Michal talked about at the beginning. I find it quite difficult to see now what the glue is that holds NATO together. You know, because you had a period during the Cold War where, as Michal pointed out, you know, there were authoritarian states within NATO. It wasn't an alliance of democracies, but the glue that held it together was a shared threat perception from the Soviet Union. Then in the post-Cold War period, NATO doesn't have that shared threat perception anymore. It tries to find this new glue, which is we're an alliance of democracies. Now I think you've got a situation where we have authoritarian states again in NATO, and there's no shared threat perception, you know, and this was, you know, all these kind of arguments that we've been having about, you know, the threat from the East versus the threat from the South. This is what Macron was talking about when he called NATO brain dead. And so in the sort of medium term, I find it quite difficult to see what the glue is that holds NATO together. Some people hope that it might be China, but I'm rather skeptical that that's going to work.
Thank you. Funda Hanım?
Yes, thank you for this interesting final question. My answer would be actually, it depends who you ask. Of course, I mean, I think that my feeling is within society, of course, there is the tendency to rather kind of equalize Turkey with Erdogan, you know, so this is in democratic terms. And then it's always my ambition to explain, you know, there is a democratic resilience in Turkey, and you have to look at the society. And then I think with regards to the political elites, they are of course also more aware of the society, but my pledge would rather be that it needs to be more put into the focus in order to really operationalize that and see that we have to work with the society. We can start cooperating on different levels with society in order to keep bridges, build bridges, and then also find ways of future cooperation.
Michael Thuman, you even wrote a report on Turkish nationalism too. So what would you say?
Yeah, well, I would answer to your question about, you know, is there an understanding for the relevance of Turkey? And I think the eternal problem we have in Germany is due to the strong presence of citizens of Turkish origin. Many things are seen through that lens. But I think, and I would support Funda's point there, that if we have more civil society actors coming from Turkey to Germany, if the mayors of the big cities visit Germany, you can also alter through interviews, through media contacts, you can alter the image of Turkey. And as we see, as of course, the Turkey policy is driven both by the political parties and the interested circles in Berlin. I think all these contacts are very important to highlight that there's not only Erdogan's Turkey, but there's much more beyond. And I think even if the Green Party will enter, and the Green Party as a very critical party towards Turkey will enter the government at the end of this year, I think a sober approach is very much possible. And as the Green Party, by the way, in this pre-election campaign is already sobering up. So as I said in the very beginning, I don't see a fundamental change in German foreign policy in this regard as well.
Dr. Funda Tekin, Michael Thuman, Hans Fudnani, Professor Güven Sak, thank you all very much for a really very engaging debate. And thanks to everyone who's been with us for this past 90 minutes. Thanks a lot and have a nice afternoon and evening all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Mhm.